Hi, my name is Debbie, and I am obsessed with all things to do with ultrasound. I'm an empty nester who has spent the last 28 years scanning in all different kinds of situations: clinics, hospitals, point of service, emergency departments, private offices, echo, vascular, general, high risk OB, and want to dive down deep into all things to do with technology, techniques, and transformation. It's time we take ultrasound to the next level. Think of this like your little power boost on your commute to all things ultrasound, along your way to the thing that we call work. So pull up a seat, make sure you're comfy, and be ready to be challenged and encouraged as we learn it's all about the frequency. Today's guest is Daniel Bourque. He is an accomplished cardiac sonographer, educator, and program director with over 20 years of experience in cardiovascular imaging and exercise physiology. Based in Lakeland, Florida, he currently serves as program director for the School of Cardiac Ultrasound in Orlando Health School of Health Sciences, where he designs curriculum, oversees clinical education, and mentors the next generation of sonographers. He has extensive experience as a sonographer educator at Orlando Regional Medical Center, specializing in echocardiography, structural heart interventions, and intraoperative TEE. Daniel is an active national speaker, a member of the ASC Educational Committee, and serves on the Cardiovascular International Exam Writing Committee. He has authored textbooks, chapters, published peer-reviewed articles, and presented at numerous national conferences. Daniel is an advanced cardiac sonographer and fellow of the American Society of Echocardiography, dedicated to advancing the field of echocardiography through education, research, and clinical experience. Please help me welcome Daniel Bourque. Daniel spoke at the STMS conference recently, and today our topic is about the minimum standards in education for echo. So welcome, Daniel, to It's All About the Frequency podcast.
Thank you, Debbie. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So let's talk about why we should have minimum standards for education.
So what's starting to come up now, and I think what we've seen in Florida and what we've seen in other areas, the pandemic really kind of teased out a lot of things, and it really kind of, I would say, forced a lot of people to retire early, but we saw a lot of people exit the field. We saw a pretty big exodus, not just in echo, but in kind of all the branches of ultrasound. And I think what that exposed is how underserved the schools are to put out a product that can actually keep up with the demand. Like there's major deficits, looking at, 15 to 20% deficit projected in echo in the next, 15 to 20 years. And, the other statistic that blew me away that I saw at the American Society of Echo this past past September, it's usually in June, was that we've got a workforce, 50% of our workforce is 45 years of age or older. And that's in echo. And I'm sure other modalities are fairly similar when it comes to that. So we've got a big shift that could happen in the next 20 years. And there hasn't really ever been, like when you look at the qualifications for somebody to come in an echo, there's nothing that ever really says like you have to have, this level of training, this degree, that degree. So what ends up happening is that you've got all of these different levels of sonographer that come in, and the field has evolved so much in the last 10 to 15 years that you have to set a benchmark to say that all people coming in have to have at least this level of training. They have to have this least level of, physics work and math work. They have to have this least level of anatomy. There isn't really anything in there. There's things that are covered within programs. Now, this is unique to ultrasound because there are programs that are, 1 to 2 years that are part of a community college where they take people in and you kind of learn some. There are 4-year programs that are existing. So this really kind of applies to, certificate programs, even associate programs. And, mine in particular is a certificate program.
Okay.
So we've kind of established that, there's a minimum level of training, minimum level of education in a specific area that we like to try to draw in from. That's just one of the main reasons. And then, licensure, that's a whole other topic, which, we
So
can
tell us about licensure. What are your thoughts on that?
I have
Because
gone back.
licensure is different than certification, right?
Correct.
So
Yeah.
maybe we should define that, right?
So licensure is regulated by the states typically, and each state is going to have its own way that they kind of go about doing that. Whereas, credentialing, certification, that is going to be kind of covered by a national body, which, the two main bodies in ECHO are ARDMS and CCI, which is there anybody else that really does the credentialing for general besides ARDMS for you guys? Like, is there?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay. So in
Yeah,
essence, there's really two main credentialing bodies that we all kind of rely on, and they say, okay, this is your registry exam,
right,
this is the passing score, this is what you need in order to, minimum standard for eligibility for registry to pass.
right.
But then you've got in each individual state, there's the thought process. There are 4 states right now in ECHO, and I don't know if it's in all ultrasound, but in ECHO, New Mexico, Oregon, New Hampshire, um, New Mexico, Oregon, and I think not Louisiana. I honestly, the fourth state is escaping me right now. I'll look at it. I'll find it again in a second.
Is it
Uh,
South Dakota?
yes, that's what. Sorry. Yes, thank you. South Dakota,
Yeah.
and they all have the licensure that's set up. It's regulated by the states, but the problem where most people kind of look at it is like if you look at the comments and you look at all the people, it's a money grab. We shouldn't have to do this because we have a credentialing exam and all of these other things, but the flip side of that coin for licensure is you look at, there's nothing that stops somebody from going from one credentialing exam to the other if they get disqualified from their institution or from their other area. Registries don't disqualify people. You can sit and take another exam. So if you get, thrown out of CCI, you can go sit and take ERDMS or whoever else. And there's not even a standard that says you have to be credentialed. That's usually governed by institutional policy. In accredited labs, they may say, you have to be credentialed, but some labs aren't accredited. So there's nothing that keeps people from who have violations to kind of track these things. That's the one thing that licensure does. When you apply for licensure, you have to have it, there is that tracking that we have. You know,
Oh,
you look at a lot of other fields that are non-medical, and this is the other thing. You go to a hairdresser, you go to a nail salon, you go to some of these other areas that you wouldn't think they have licensure. They
yeah.
have a regulation body. They have a field that kind of keeps track of everything that's going on. So I've gone back and forth because, you let the state try to handle some of these things, and there are nightmare stories that people have talked about. And I have a colleague of mine that I'm very close with who has talked about her scenario in New Hampshire. And it
Hmm.
has absolutely been a nightmare with how they have enforced some of the policies, how they collect some of the information. Some people will send in their transcripts and those are okay. Some people are saying I need your high school transcript, even though they have a master's degree. And because
Oh,
they didn't send in their high school transcript, they're not qualified. She herself is an advanced cardiac sonographer. She's the only advanced cardiac sonographer in the state of New Hampshire. And they're saying that they can't find the registry. And she says, I know because I'm the only one. Here's how to go through the process to find it. And they said that she made the program up. This is like the state that is telling her this. So there are nightmare stories about it. There's got to be a common ground. And I know they're exploring these things. We are becoming too big. We especially in the echo side, we are getting way too much responsibility with
uh,
patients and the amount of pathology and all these things that are going on to not have a minimum training education standard and some kind of a regulation and licensure. I mean, you look what happened in Oregon where all of this kind of started, and it was on the OB side when there were people buying up ultrasound machines because they wanted to do these a la carte.
from home. Yeah.
That's where it really kind of started. It's like, well, anybody could buy it. Well, no. Like we have to step in and say this has to be for medical reasons only, and that's kind of what started the process. But I mean, it, you could go down a rabbit hole and argue back and forth.
Yeah. As a traveler, I appreciate not having to be licensed, right? Because it makes me not have to jump through as many hoops,
Mhm.
possibly, right? I do for those 4 states, obviously, but
Sure.
and then they push it through really fast, within 10 days or a week or something. And
Mhm.
so, um, so I appreciate not having license, but I also see the benefits of having it. Like you said, there's more supervision and I think it gives you more credibility. Like nurses are licensed, right? And they're licensed in each state and they're governed by each state and they're similar, but they are different. What you're able to do as a nurse and what you're not able to do as a nurse is different state to state.
Mhm.
So, I don't know. I think you have legitimate you bring legitimate concerns and reasons to be licensed. Um,
Here's
but
the
yeah,
here's the other argument that I've heard. If at any point in time, if you're not licensed, and I've heard horror stories about people getting up in front of senators and politicians and asking like, show me your license. Well, we're not licensed. And the senator followed up the question to say, well, what's your minimum education standard? We don't have a minimum education standard. So who's to say that at any point in time they could basically deem what we're doing illegitimate, even though we know how legitimate we are. We know that there cannot be
right,
medical imaging that could survive without us. And this is not something that has to be enacted tomorrow where everything gets cut off.
right,
What you have to do is you have to look at rolling out a policy that's going to take 10, 15, 20 years. When you change something this magnitude, you have to have a rollout period where you're kind of phasing this in. You look at physical therapy, whether you agree with what they did or not, 20 years ago, they transitioned to a DPT program. So all of their physical therapists went from, master's level education or bachelor's level to
bachelors, yeah,
yeah, DPT 2020 was the big push. It took them a long time. They rolled it out. You got direct access and things that went along with it, but it did add a certain level of credibility. And any of us has used direct access for physical therapy for things that you don't necessarily have to go to the physician. That's been beneficial. It does cut down wait time. I'm sure the physicians are accepting of it for the things that they don't necessarily have to deal with that are not urgent or imaging reliable, where the physical therapist can manage those things.
yeah,
This is kind of on that same boat. At any point in time, they can say, well, how do you prove that you're legitimate? You have no minimum
right,
education standard. You have no licensure. Who's to say that anybody just can't do what they want?
right.
That
Well,
was the other
they
argument
can't
that
be
changed
held
my mind.
accountable then,
Correct.
right?
Correct.
So,
Yes.
which brings us back to that hot topic again of
Yeah.
accountability. Like you, you're not going to get too far to sue us because not a lot is expected of us
Yeah. Good luck finding them.
to some degree,
Yeah.
right? However, the more and more, the longer I work in the field, the more like I'm in Washington, D.C. right now, and they're wanting us to do it all, right? Like and so I'm just like, oh, wow, this really doesn't feel good, right? But hey,
Yeah.
if your name is on it, then you're gonna take that brunt of that responsibility. Unfortunately, I mean, that puts a lot on us to do in a very short period of time, right? Your exam time's cut and your responsibility is a lot higher, right? So,
And you know what happens when you cut exam times? You can't cut exam times. You start cutting exam times, you start missing things.
right, right. Which has always been, right, a conversation that we always have, right?
Mhm.
And I think STMS has done a great job to come out with recent studies. I think the first one was March of 2023 with at least some guidelines. So at least now we have something we can go by
Mhm.
or to show to HR or to show to, physicians, not like they're in dire need to change their whole setup of their lab, but
Um,
they're more about productivity, right?
They are, and that's being kind of squeezed upon them more. It's, do
Right.
more with less. And, that less is usually less time, which then, the trickle down effect comes into us and, cutting of exam times and, you have to see more patients. And there becomes a breaking point at some point where something is going to break. And usually the things that end up breaking are what? Missed diagnoses on an exam because you've cut that significant amount of time away for the sonographer to do a thorough examination. We know how long it takes to do a full echo. A full echo with pathology, especially something like aortic stenosis, minimum of 45 minutes, minimum, to do a good study, to do a complete study the way that it should be to qualify or disqualify a patient for a procedure. But then the other thing that breaks is what? It's the sonographer,
Right.
because now you're getting more and more examinations. You're getting more time with your hand on the probe instead of giving those gaps where you have that little bit of a respite to write up your examination. And we're all doing, these detailed reports. Any lab that's, in the current mode that we're in now, you're doing a very detailed report, which should take you 10 to 15 minutes to put together, that you hand to the physician. And what does the physician do? Physician then reads the report most of the time and
Sometimes does not and
and
signs it,
we'll
right?
correct and we'll peruse some of the images. But that's the other thing that you have to look at. It's like, well, if we're good enough to do all of this,
Right.
we have to have something that's regulating with that level of responsibility, like you're alluding to. We're literally having a document that a fair amount of physicians, and we can say this out loud here because of the forum that we're in. Fair amount of physicians look at the report with a good sonographer, they will just sign what is in that document. That's a lot of
Absolutely.
responsibility.
That is a lot of responsibility. And it's a lot to ask, and Echo a little bit different than OB, but in OB, part of the expectation from the patient is entertainment, right? And so you're always trying to do the entertainment, but also look for millimeter structures that occur in less than 1% of the population. So, and then they're bringing their kids in and their family in to a lot of these places. And so I would beg to differ that most people, even if you work from home,
Mhm.
don't work with their kids at home, right? So,
Not effectively, anyway. Right.
right, not effectively, absolutely. So, anyway, it's just so what areas of healthcare do you think we should be recruiting from then?
So what we have noticed from the echo side of things, allied health backgrounds seem to do very well. People with a really good grasp of anatomy. So what we have found from the echo side of things is we have grabbed a lot of people from exercise science. That
Ah,
seems to
yeah,
work extremely well with echo. They have a great interpretation of, cardiac cycle, cardiac physiology, anatomy.
right.
They understand responses to stress, stress testing, all of those things. It seems to work just extremely well from the echo side, and we've had, a lot of good success with that. That was my background. A lot of the people that taught me were in exercise physiology, so that seems to be a great aspect to work into. But the other thing I think that's underappreciated is you have to have people that have some level of hand-eye coordination. There is a skill to this that doesn't often get discussed, I feel like. And as much education as you do, it is, from my experience, I feel like it's at least a 60-40. And that skill is the 60% of what makes somebody successful. And part of that is being able to, what do we have to do? Well, we have to be able to move our hand without looking at the patient. From echo will be everything else. You're looking
Right,
at that monitor. So
right,
there's that hand-eye coordination that you have to have some kinesthetic awareness. So if you don't really have great kinesthetic awareness, those people tend to not do well. If you can't visualize structure, you have to be a visual learner, for sure. And those are the main areas that I've kind of noticed. You have to have a hand-eye coordination, exercise science for us, and then some kind of a visual aspect to your learning.
yeah.
What have you guys seen with your field? Like, is there any particular area that seems to do well in the other modalities?
I think some pick up on it right away and others it takes time. I definitely was one that could visualize it much faster than I could coordinate my hands with it. So I could see it instantly, but I couldn't always get it with my hand right away. So um yeah, but I think over time it came, right? And so thus the practice, right? You're just your hands on the transducer as much as possible, right? So whether you have that kinetic skill or not, I think it still can be learned,
Mhm.
right? And I think it can be learned right or left-handed. I'm hoping our future is going to helping us to learn how to scan both right and left. Because I think from an ergonomic standpoint, we need to be able to do that to balance our body a little bit.
Mhm.
You know, do you scan left?
So for us, yeah, we scan left. I think it might be a little different just because of the patient position for us, because a lot of the other modalities you're supine.
Right,
So you're just kind of lying. So you can kind of approach the patient from either
right,
side.
right,
For a true echo, you're left lateral decubitus.
right,
So
right,
it's hard. Like if you're right-handed, you're over the patient. If you're left-handed, you're facing.
right,
So we train people to do left-handed facing the patient. You can also, turn yourself around, do right-handed facing the patient. When you walk into an ICU, you don't always have the luxury of knowing what
right,
condition or what's going to be in the room that you walk into. You
right,
do have to have some skill in your non-dominant scanning hand. I'm right-handed,
right,
but I learned left-handed, but my non-dominant scanning hand is my right hand.
right,
If I need to, I can go on the other side of the bed. I can pick up my right hand. It's going to take me a second. I have to make sure my indicator is this way, but I'll
right,
be able to get a very good image that it can make a diagnosis. It's not going to be a complete protocol, but that's really what you need to be able to do.
right, right.
For you
So,
guys, I could see the benefits in you being having to do both hands. That would be
right.
extremely beneficial.
Yeah. Yeah, I've run into a few cardiac techs who've learned right-handed and that's how they scan right-handed. And I'm like, okay, well, some of those patients are big, man. I'm telling you, if you're laying on top of them, hats off to you, but that's just not my cup of tea. But
It's not comfortable. I have a student who did some observations in the echo department. We have one person that still scans right-handed. He does really well. He's got his own system and he's efficient. He's great with it. But she's about 5 feet tall.
yeah, I'm
She's
5'1".
and she's climbing onto
That
the
would not
bed.
work, man.
She's like, she goes, "This is not comfortable at all." She goes, "I did not feel comfortable." And it's a male patient. She's a small little girl and she's climbing on. She goes, "This did not feel good." I said,
Yeah,
completely understand. That's
let's
why
try
we do
something
it the other
else,
way.
right?
Yeah, exactly.
So, what do you think is a factor of decline of the skills in our newly trained sonographers?
We're seeing more online stuff. I think that since that has come on, we're seeing less of a emphasis on the skills training. What's happening is that you're seeing some places that are doing kind of like I want to say the advanced credential, but you're looking at people that have in echo. If you go for just echo, most of the time there's a minimum number of hours or scans that you're trying to get. Like,
Hmm.
for us, it ends up being about 1,900 hours worth of scans. You're getting, hundreds and hundreds of scans in. But when you go into an area where you are already credentialed, and then you go to some programs that are accelerated, and then you go to a lot of the online modules, and then it's like, okay, let's compound that on top of that with, well, find a clinical site that you can get your scans in, and then you do your scans, but you don't always have a clinical preceptor that's going to be, on point, or you're not getting enough of the time and there's no documentation of that. So that's one of the things that I'm seeing. It's some of it also is that there's just, I mean, no other way to kind of mince it. There's just some really bad schools out there as well,
Yeah.
uh, that don't, I've heard of programs, that will take students' money and then they say, okay, now you go out and find a clinical site. What?
Yeah,
So I'm going to pay you $30,000, $40,000. And then I have to go out walk into a clinic or a hospital and say, hey, can you please take me as a student? You have no idea who I am. I have no liability coverage insurance whatsoever. I've never done this before. And I'm with so-and-so school. Can you please train me? who is going to do that? So how hard it, so clinical sites are everything. And I think there's been a decline in that. You're also seeing a lot of these, facilities that are getting bigger and they're kind of slowly, shielding themselves in. And then they're kind of doing their own inside training, which I think that's starting to pick up a little bit more now as a result of some of these poorer programs. There are some great programs out there, but there's some really bad programs out there as well.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. So just lack of, well, there's no real instructions for clinical instructors, right? So you're just hoping that whoever are scanning with is good at what they do, right?
Correct. You're hoping that the school itself is giving the clinical instructors some guidance as to, what their expectations are, what should be done. You're talking to the students, and I'm in the first year of a program, so this is all like fresh on to me because I've seen all the things that were done incorrectly, and you want to do things well and model yourself after the good programs.
Right, right,
Build a good relationship with the clinical sites. You have to make sure that you're empowering the students to say, this is what you need to know. This is what is the correct way to do things. And then you send them to the clinical site knowing that they've got a strong base of information and then they can make their decisions based on what the clinical instructor is going to tell them. Because the thing about being a clinical instructor is when you get a student, you got to be on your toes. You got to
right,
know all the numbers. You got to
right,
know what you're measuring. And like your students are going to ask you questions. And if you don't know the answer to that, the student is like, they're looking for answers. So what it does is it also re-educates the clinical sites, the people that want to really do this. And
right,
if you don't, it's going to be noticed, pretty quickly. And the students they're going to see that. A good students that are empowered by the
right,
institutions, but that's not always happening.
right, right. So having an education for clinical instructors is,
Yeah.
yeah,
You give
yeah,
them a framework, right? There are some places that will do, what I would love nothing more than to have like a 1 day seminar
right.
and say, "Hey, this is what we're going to cover. Like, I'm going to put you through the information that I'm giving to these students." It's difficult to have that kind of time, but, putting something together where it says, okay, this is what we're learning the first 5 weeks. Remember what it was like to be that student sitting on the other side of that table, kind of learning all of that stuff. But then this is what the expectation is for you, being able to correct them on, hand position. This is the nomenclature, so standardizing that. These are all things that, good clinical schools will build with the clinical sites, making sure that you're explaining things the same way, the pathology assessment. So there's a relationship that has to be built there. There hasn't been as much of that with some of these newer sites that come in that put some of these people out where you don't know what you're getting from a clinical site, but at the same time, they're not preparing the student to know what to get from the clinical site either, because you have to do both.
Yeah. I think there's the training of the student, but also the training of the clinical
Yeah. And the students
instructor.
sometimes will train the clinical because it puts them on their
Right,
toes
right,
without realizing it.
right, right. I also feel pretty strongly about paying a clinical instructor. In the nursing field, they get paid to train you, to onboard you, and I think we need to step up to that. I think we need to pay, and maybe the clinical instructors would be more invested,
I
right?
agree.
Because I think it does take some extra time. It does take extra paperwork. It takes extra time to explain, slow yourself down and explain everything you're doing, right? How nice. I remember training somebody and then thinking, oh, it's so nice just to come in here and scan, right? Like I don't have to explain everything.
Exactly.
So there's definitely a stress and a strain with training. And so I think we need to be paid for it. If you're gonna give a school $30,000, I sure hope you're gonna pay who you're training me with, right? And years in the past, that's never been done. So,
No, and what we try to do, because, just getting started, one of the things I advocated very much for was exactly what you're saying. We need to compensate the labs in some way, especially the ones that are primarily functioning as clinical instructors. So one of the things that we've kind of thrown around is that we don't have the money necessarily to pay them as part of a stipend, but what we have done is we've set aside some money to say, okay, hey, we'll sponsor ASE memberships for the primary instructors. We'll give, we'll have meals, just any little things that we can think of and any little incentives to show that appreciation will go a long way towards it. But yeah, ultimately compensation should be looked at. And on the flip side of it, with the way that there are shortages now, one of the things that we've tried to promote to our staff is like, hey, we know you're short. We are giving you somebody to mold however you want them.
Mm-hmm.
The more time that you put into them, meaning you give them 6 good months, 8 good months, you are going to get a complete model employee that has no bad habits coming to you.
Right.
This is your opportunity. If you just put that time in, you are going to get a return on investment that is going to be
Right.
spectacular. So if you present it that way, again, everybody wants now instant gratification, but
Right.
it doesn't work that way.
Right. Or I've heard some people say, like somebody in radiology wants to learn ultrasound, or somebody in CT has decided they want to learn ultrasound and in a more rural environment, right? And so the hospital's like, I don't know if we want to pay for that because then that takes somebody away from our CT pool, right? And I'm like, well, or you've got somebody who could do both.
Yeah,
Like you can't, it doesn't hurt you to be more educated,
no,
right?
it doesn't. And rural
So,
places, especially, they're hard enough getting people to come in. You have to cross train a lot of people. I mean,
right.
I've seen enough of the rural facilities to know that, you're doing general, you're doing vascular, you may do, 3 vasculars, a general, and 2 echoes, and that's your day.
Yeah.
But your hospital, you've got 30 beds in your hospital. But again, that's a need, right?
Right.
If it just comes down to what every single person is and what the need is for every single person,
Right.
it's still a person on the other side of that table, whether it's in a rural or whether it's in a city. So you're still providing a service. That's important.
So, what would you say are some of the core prerequisites that we need on just a minimum for training for Echo, since you're an Echo?
I think, I mean, what
How many?
the requisites that we have for our program, they're pretty basic. Different programs have different levels. I mean, you have to have at least anatomy, physiology, 1 and 2, medical terminology. I think some level of exercise science and looking at because you do look at a lot more with exercise science, you do have a lot of cardiac, so like some kind of a basic exercise physiology would I think be also very helpful. I don't, that would be a hard thing to kind of see, but it's, you're looking at the circulatory system, you're looking at responses, adaptations, pathophysiology is another great one. Especially cardiac pathophysiology, and then
Hmm?
even a basic um, pharmacology. Try to get those things. Those if people come in with those things, I feel like they'll do a lot better. Um, but as far as the requirements go, they have to at least have a good working anatomy knowledge to even like stand a chance. And then when you get into the physics, that they have to have a good solid math background. And I would say a physics course, we don't require a physics course yet, but depending on how the semester ends up going, that might be something that we kind of look into and at least say that they have to have some kind of a training in that, because we try to run the physics on the echo side more tailored to the instrumentation and image optimization, as opposed to trying to memorize the formulas and trying to do all the calculations and stuff. Because most of the time, unless you're doing research, a lot of that you end up kind of cramming into your head and then you forget it as soon as you're done. And what I want to try to do, and what some of the other programs that I've seen really try to do, is they try to model the physics after what am I going to be able to do on day one when I walk into the room and use the machine? How am I going to improve the image? Well, I can look at frequency, probe frequency. I can look at depth. I can look at sector width. I can see how frame rates are affected by color. All of those things are physics,
Right.
but we kind of get bogged down on saying, well, what is the pulse repetition frequency when the Nyquist limit is exceeded, and all of those
Right.
fancy things that we do.
Yeah.
So.
But if you're going to be an accredited school, I mean, they're going to have to pass a physics board, right? So you do have to cover the XYZ and all and cram all the equations and whatever, even though, quite frankly, that's still old science, right? Our probes nowadays are not made like that, right?
Correct. Yeah,
I mean, it's old, that's old science, and that's just the basic of sound waves, really. Uh, more than anything. It's not, that's not how our probes are made anymore, right?
that's
So,
an excellent point that you make because it's like you try telling a student that you can't change the frequency on a probe. It's like, well, I have this little dial over here that changes the frequency. Well, it's not really
right.
the
Yeah.
it's not really changing the frequency. What you're doing is you just kind of it's like I can't even explain it in
Yeah.
good
Yeah.
and
That's a whole new class in and of itself. Yeah.
yeah,
I think
exactly.
there's got to be like a program just to get you to pass the registry and then another program to really explain how is it now, right?
Yep.
And how does it work now? Because we don't know that, right? That's not taught to us anymore. But it's
No,
very different than 20 years ago, right?
all right.
So,
Yeah.
um, how much hands-on experience do your students get, or do you want them to have?
So our program is different. I mean, as much hands-on. So they spend 46 weeks in clinical. So they have 4 days a week for 46 weeks of hands-on. And so it's a very intense. So we get them out into the field in that after the first 5 weeks of the program. So we have a 5 week, what you would call almost an intensive boot camp where they're learning everything normal. They get anatomy, they get all the basic echo images. What is normal? What is a normal parasternal? What is a normal tricuspid valve? What is a normal mitral valve? How do you do measurements, volumes, everything on normal? And then, the concept is that when you understand everything normal, anything that's not normal is abnormal by
Right,
definition. You may not know what it is,
right,
but if you see like these,
exactly. But you know what normal is.
you know what normal is. So it's abnormal. And if it's abnormal, well, what's abnormal? Well, that mitral valve, it usually opens like this, but I notice there's like big chunks all over the mitral valve.
Right,
I don't know what that is, but that's not normal. Well, it could be, and that's when you teach them the pathology, which is where we
right.
start on week 6. So we
Mhm.
go into the pathology, and then when they go to the clinical sites, and that's where having good clinical sites is important because you are putting them into the workflow in the hopes that, they're going to, and they're all they're doing is scanning. So it's almost like a full-time employee. And that's the same model that I went through. And as far as learning goes, I mean, I went through 4 years of college, 2 years of a master's program. My 1 year, I learned more in a 1 year certificate program than I can say that I've learned in most years that I spent especially in undergraduate work. But it was because there was that mixture of what I learned in the classroom. I went right out into the field the next day. If
Right,
I learned aortic stenosis on Monday, I could go in and look at an aortic stenosis case on Tuesday,
right,
and then mitral regurgitation on Wednesday or whichever. I had the exact, you know, it was a direct line into actually looking at what I was learning about, which is not the same that you can say for a lot of other fields. And, this is a model that's in the trades, right? If you look at the trades, they'll have classroom environments, but then, electrician is out in the field. You'll learn some of the basics about electricity, but then you're actually going out and you're
doing it
running
right,
wire, you're building, you're doing things.
right.
That's kind of what this model ends up being like.
So, is there a number for hours spent in clinical
That correlate or what we have. So what we
that
have,
you are making them as a requirement?
so what ends up being, it's 400, it ends up being it's just short of 500 500 classroom hours, and it's just short of 1900 clinical hours is what they'll end up logging by the time. So everything is done in Trajexis, which is like the greatest program. When I was a student, it was all on paper and everything else. You had to write down what you did, and if you missed it, you forgot to write it. With Trajexis, everything is logged in so you can run reports and see. So the numbers that will end up coming in, it'll be, just short of 1900 hours worth of clinical scan time. And then however many scans that they get in between that. Like right now, for example, we're just starting week 3. So I can look and see that some of the students have logged and seen whether it's a observed or a partial scan that they have observed or partial. Some of them observed 60 echoes up to this point. Some of them have done 40. It just depends on, what kind of volume the facility is doing. But each of those scans, 30 to 45 minutes is what, the amount of time that ends up getting logged. So, doing the math there, that all starts to compile.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a lot of hours. That's a lot of hours.
And some programs space it out over the course of a couple of years, 2 days a week, 3 days a week. But what I thought was that you have just a consistency, and you're building repetition, and you don't have gaps. Because I don't know about you, but when you first picked up a probe, but I remember what it was like. If I went 3 days without scanning, I was like, oh crap, am I going to
Right.
remember how to do this?
Right.
And I had to like really think about it. You kind of eliminate that because, skill development takes years. And like, with ultrasound, most modalities, it's like 5 years before you're like really vested and you can say like, I can do this without any worries whatsoever. So you lose days and you have gaps in those days of the skill.
Right.
It's tough.
Yeah. So if we're talking about students, what kind of qualities really cause a student to be really successful in a program?
They have to be self-reliant. And if they are not self-reliant, because if you look at our field in general, you're kind of dictating a lot of the pace of things that you're doing. So if you don't have that self-reliance and that little bit of a personal ownership on things that you're doing, it's going to be very difficult to be successful because you're either going to get lost. You have to advocate for yourself when you go to these clinical sites. You don't have somebody standing over your shoulder. Like you're getting thrown into an environment. Again, there's introductions and everything else, but at this point you're kind of in there and it's like, if I want to scan, I have to endear myself to the lab. So I have to take a lot of initiative to do things because nothing is going to be given to you. You have zero skill when you're walking in. No
Right.
one's going to say, here you go, here's your probe. At least not a good lab anyway. So there has to be that personal responsibility, that self-reliance where you can, you can walk in and have just that little bit of confidence. You may have the self-doubt, but you have to have a certain level of confidence. So those are some of the things when we do interviews for the programs, like I'm looking for some of those little qualities for things that within the job, are you doing things that are just outside of the job description? Like, for example, if your job every day is to, compile a list of patients for the day. I had one person that interviewed very well and, she's doing well in the program now, that within that framework of going through the list of patients throughout the course of the day, she would go through all the H&Ps and she would kind of prioritize them and order them. I said, well, who told you to do that? She goes, well, it just seemed like the right thing to do. It was logical. So when you kind of look at things like that, and of course we do that in our daily, so that's like that's the perfect thinking that I want for somebody. That's exactly what we do, right? We triage our patients on a consistent basis. So those are the kind of things that I look at in an interview. And if you need to take direction for every single thing, it's not going to go well.
I wish everybody had that. Right?
I know, right? It's a high level skill to try to get, but I've seen that be the most
Think you're
important.
reaching for the stars.
I know we are, but we got to set the bar high, right?
Yeah, you do. You do have to set the bar high. I agree with that because if you don't, then they're not even going to meet halfway, right? So, yeah, I definitely think to set the bar high is awesome. I think we need to do that more often. Um, what other technologies or techniques do you think need to be included?
I think schools are now starting to look at, incorporating some advanced quantification stuff. Like there has to be at least an introduction into that. Like it's really difficult for a student now to come out and not have some working knowledge of 3D, to not have some working knowledge of strain. And I think there are a lot of underserved labs that don't necessarily do this on a regular basis, but it is absolutely necessary that these advanced quantifications, especially in echo with, strain in 3D, we do good labs with advanced pathologies do a lot of it, and it can be extremely useful, but there's not everyone that is comfortable using it. And I don't think people get a lot of exposure to it early in their career. And it's not like you have to come out and be an expert, but there just has to be more of an awareness and a little bit higher level of comfort with it, and kind of, pulling the veil back a little bit and not making it look like just a blob of information that's in front of you. Showing it how you can, we try to strip it down into the simplest things, and that is going to get more people to actually use the technology and what things to look for when it's incorrect, because I've seen people just kind of throw it up there and they have no idea what the information means. And that can be just as dangerous as,
Right.
not
Yeah.
doing it.
Yeah, because you got the information,
Yeah. But,
but you
how
didn't
does
do
that
anything
information,
with it,
you didn't do
right?
anything with it. You
Yeah.
don't know what to do.
And you
Yeah.
didn't know that you need to do something with it,
Correct. Correct.
which comes back to licensure, right?
It's full circle, right? Everything comes back full circle.
Oh, so what kind of things do you use to prepare your students for certification then?
There's a couple of textbooks I found any of the registry review books, like Benita Anderson and Margaret Park did a great review book a few years ago for Echo. It can be just something as simple as Kahoot. I don't know if you've ever used Kahoot.
I
Man,
haven't.
Kahoot is the best thing in the world. I not ever used it. And we got a membership through the system. And what it is it's a game. If
Oh,
you've never played Kahoot, I recommend it highly for anything. You can basically, like, it puts up questions, and then you have a certain amount of time, and then everybody gets to chime in and you get to see who answers what, and it can be anonymous, it cannot be anonymous, but you put all of these questions up, and the students are asking. I give a weekly Kahoot for them to review. So this week's Kahoot's going to be on mitral and tricuspid stenosis. So I'll come up with 15 or 20 Kahoot questions, and it's a game. And they can play the game where it says, what is the average mean gradient for mitral stenosis? And then you have your four choices, you pick it, and then it tells you, nope, you're wrong. And then this is the real answer, and you can give an explanation. It's a fascinating, fantastic tool that I did not know how useful it was going to be until the first week, when everybody was just like kind of spinning and they're looking at me like I got six heads. And I said, hey, let's try this. So then I pivoted and I put up with a Kahoot. And as soon as I did that, it completely changed the affect of the room.
okay.
Completely changed it. Like, you're laughing, you're pointing out stuff. You can make it whatever level. You can make it entertaining. You can put images up. I mean, there's just so many things you can do with it. I would say that's probably one of the things that I'll use a lot of. I'll take all of those Kahoots, put them together, and that can be a registry once you put them all and do them all, as you kind of build them as you go. So,
Awesome. That's a nice little technology to
yeah.
use.
And it's free. There's different levels. You can have the subscription, but the free version is excellent. Like, there's a ton of stuff you can do with the free version.
Okay.
Yeah, so there's really not much. The only thing that the paid version gives you more options. Like, you can ask the questions a different way. Like, you can pin and do so. But the free version, you can just do multiple choice questions, which, I mean, that's all most
All we're
registry
going
exams
to do
are anyway.
anyway, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's a perfect thing to use.
That's amazing. That's awesome. So then my last question is about continuing education and opportunities, and how do you encourage like your staff members or your recent graduates? What do you encourage them to do, and how do you encourage maybe the hospital to help pay for them to do things?
So I was encouraged as an early career individual to get involved with ASE, and to attend the meeting. And we kind of said in the beginning, right? If you have to be constantly learning, right? You're always learning. If you're not learning, you're not growing.
Right.
You go to conferences. The interesting thing about it is it's not just about sitting in lectures, right? You've been to SDMS. I go to ASE constantly. Most of the learning and the is all outside of the actual room where the presentations are being done, because you're collaborating with colleagues, you're networking. And what networking ends up doing is networking ends up leading to, well, hey, he would be great to be on this guidelines committee. Like, let's put him on the
Yes.
guidelines committee. And like, oh, wait, you can, you know, I think you'd be a great speaker to go here. Maybe we get you to speak, and then you review a talk. So it completely, it's not just about looking at the lectures. So then when you talk to your sites, wherever your hospitals are, to try to, you talk about the benefit of promotion of the industry itself, but you're also promoting the health system. You were saying that I am at the top of my field. I'm presenting at the American Society of Echo. I'm representing Orlando Health, or I'm representing whatever organization that you're with. And it's a proud distinction to have your name up there, that everybody sees that.
Yeah.
And it's branding, it's everything that's good with it. And yeah, it's not like, $1 million advertising, but it still lends credibility to, the organization. And then you can start to draw from that.
Or
Become,
credibility to yourself, right? Like you don't have to be the top of your game. You can volunteer to give a speech, and that goes on a nice place on your resume, right? You're still building resume, regardless if you're been doing it for 5 years or 20 years, right? You're still looking for opportunities to keep growing, right? They're just it might be in different ways,
correct. And not
right?
everyone wants to speak, right? People can volunteer. You can volunteer to review. There's so many things. I mean,
Right.
ASC especially has tons of, they have all little micro volunteers. Like, you could just get like a quick little survey, and that's you're a micro volunteer, and you get to, and it kind of gets you into actually giving back, because, so many people have been generous in this field for me. I am standing where I am standing, not because of all the things that I've done, but all because of the things that people have done for me. So it's now my job to give back to them.
Yes.
How it works.
Yes, that's exactly what I say. And that's how I feel. Like when I hadn't gone to SNMS in a while and I started going and I thought, I don't know why I stopped going. Like, or why isn't this talked about more?
Yeah.
I went to STMS. I was there for a day before I couldn't walk on my knee, but there was this group from South Dakota, I believe.
Okay.
And there was a young new grad in this group, and she's like, I had no idea. Like it was their first time for all of them. And some have been in the field for a long time. And so it just opened their eyes to see all the many more opportunities or how they could play a part of the community, right? And so that was one reason why I started my podcast, is just so people can get to know people of our community and what they do and what their passion is and what they like to do, or maybe a tricks of the trade for this or that or the other, so that people can reach out and connect and move themselves forward in some kind of a way, you know.
Absolutely.
Um,
Absolutely.
I love ASC's mentor program. One of my friends, pediatric cardiology, showed me the mentor program, and I thought, why don't we have that in SDMS or RDMS, whatever it is? What a beautiful way to, hey, I need someone to mentor me in this, that, and the other.
That's a great program. I'm actually, I help out on that program. It's been very rewarding. I've had 3 people now that I've worked with on the mentor level, and it's been fantastic.
Yeah, what a great way to really connect people, right? Give them a platform to reach out and say, hey, this is what I'm working on, and then collaborate, right? I think it's a beautiful way to connect people. And we need to do that more and more and more,
Mhm.
because we need to come together as a group. Like even STMS, I think, needs more people to be a part of it,
Mhm.
to build it up, to have different levels, right? Beginner, intermediate, advanced type levels, to show what we can do and where we are going. There's a ton of experience in that room,
Yeah.
in all those rooms, right? And just to tap into the guy who's in charge of the STMS journal, right? Like Kevin is just full of knowledge, right? You are full of knowledge for Echo, right? So if I have another question, I know I can like email you or call you or say, hey, can I send you this and tell me what you think? Like what's
Absolutely.
going on here, what's going on there. And I don't know. I think we just need to come together more as a community of people saying, we're here for you. You know, I talked to another guest, and he's right, and it can't go without talking about. But, when we were learning, you and I, there was a lot of people who didn't want to show us,
You're right.
right?
Yeah.
Because they didn't want to be showed up or they didn't want somebody to get better than them. So they would rather not show you and you learn on your own than they would just take over and do it as opposed to teaching you or whatever. So we have still a lot of that to overcome
Mhm.
in some of the places that we're at, right? So yeah, I think the good outweigh the bad. And so the more good that we can put together as a force, the bad will dissipate, right?
I agree.
Hopefully.
Put enough good energy out there and it's going to overcome all the other ones.
I'm hoping. Well, awesome. Thanks, Daniel, for your time and for sharing your expertise and your passion. And I look forward to talking to you hopefully in the future for maybe another topic of some kind.
I'd love
But
to.
um, we'll revisit the licensure topic again, I'm sure someday.
Hopefully we'll make some progress, right?
I think we get tired of going and asking for that from our legal system, right? It's not a real priority to them,
Yeah. No,
um,
you're right.
um, unfortunately. So, but I think as we grow in numbers, we'll have more of a voice,
Mhm.
right?
Yep.
So I think we need to just kind of get these things started of good education and paying our educators and paying our people who onboard us extra and paying our people to do this, right? To incentivize them to want to do a better job,
Absolutely.
I think is a key.
Absolutely.
Thanks again, Daniel. I appreciate your time.
Thank you, Debbie. This has been great. I appreciate it.
Thank you for tuning in to It's All About the Frequency podcast. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Share it with a friend and remember to keep your frequency high.